would now like to introduce the moderator of Session B, another colleague of mine, Ollie Wildman. He's a director and head of design for buildings in Ramboll UK. In the 17 years Ollie has been with Ramboll, he's made extensive contributions to realization of some of the most interesting and challenging buildings in the UK and beyond. And in his role as the head of design, he anchors design excellency in all of our UK buildings, large and small. Ollie, welcome to the stage. And I'd like to invite the speakers and the two panelists for Session B.
Thank you very much, and welcome back to our speakers. And I'll introduce our panelists as well. Our first panelist is Stanislava Bošković.
Correct.
And we practice.
Yes.
Extensively practice. An architect and urban designer. Interestingly shares your life between professional practice with LOL Space and your research activity at Imperial College. You're very welcome. And our second panelist, Anna Mijic.
Perfect.
Professor of Water Systems Integration and a director of the Centre of Systems Engineering and Innovation, also at Imperial. She's leading the development of novel systems and tools focused on quantifying the interaction between human-alerted water cycle and sustainable development. You're also most welcome. So, a quick reminder of our provocation. The built environment has advanced at the cost of the natural environment. I think Paul described that very well, to a point where we recognise it's not sustainable. How can we repair this damage and move forward to regeneration? So first of all, I thought Stanislava and Anna, we've heard fantastic presentations from Chiara and Paul.
Thank you.
Really brilliant, I have to say. So I thought it would be good just to give you the floor for a minute or two, just to give your reflections on what you've seen, the provocation, but also how that relates to you and your work. Maybe Anna first?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think first it's great to be here in this very kind of unique spatial environment. I think we've been brought into the sound environment as well. So maybe just two key points which were really interesting to me from the presentations and kind of linked maybe to work that I do as well. I think we talk a lot about the trade-off between the urbanization, design, development, and then the cost of that development. I think this is the kind of key theme around the design and environment perspective. But I think two maybe additional, provocations maybe, which is contradictory to maybe what I do in my everyday life. So I work a lot on developing models and tools that can quantify these impacts and try to find the solutions, what next. But equally, I think we know what is good. And I think one thing that I would like us all to think about, and Paul showed some really lots of numbers, does the 15% improvement or 50% impact compared to 80% fundamentally makes a difference if we know that green spaces are good, if we know that being close to the environment is good, if we know that there are some materials that are better than others, if we know that it's really challenging for us to keep building and developing. So I think this is my first question. I think in the practical decision, you need to put some numbers in to make that decision and justify, but I think we are over-justifying something that is very obvious. And this comes to the point which I think we haven't touched upon this today. I don't know if we want to go there, but which is the questions of the governance and financing. And my second point is linked to Chiara's brilliant session. I actually closed my eyes and I heard water as dominant sound. This is close to what I do. I do water engineering and water management. But I think it comes to my second maybe hypothesis, which is around how we approach the design and how we approach engineering and development. Because again, fundamentally, I think it came very clearly, especially in the first part, we were in the space where we talk about the design and engineering and education, but we fundamentally talk about the people who we need to teach, or the people who actually use everything. So, the people who exist on this planet, and then, of course, there are, other beings on the planet as well. So we all use a shared space, and and the question is what we here think it's a good thing to happen, is that what everyone else feels is a good thing to happen? So that second hypothesis is around what good looks like, and working backwards then what is possible. Because I think we are doing a lot of things that are the wishful thinking and the development thinking around expanding and growth, while then fixing what we do in a hindsight. I think what Chiara really showed us nicely is this sound of a city and thinking about what we really like. And I think the world in which we want to live in as a collective agreement of people who actually live in, and working backwards from that would be really, really interesting exercise. Is it possible? I don't know.
Thank you, Stanislava.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed, and I think everyone did so much, both of our presentations of this session. And I know, Paul, you thought it was a combination that was seemingly unrelated, but there is a lot of, and I'm not talking from the curatorial point of view, but it was really a lot of points in common between two of your presentations. And Chiara reminded us this multi-sensorial capacity of perceiving spaces that we are living, natural or urban spaces that we are living in, and being at the Pearl, that is the state-of-art facility to test response of human beings to different conditions through different senses, really fits brilliantly to what you were showing us in many different senses. And it also made me think about how often we forget that also the perception of sound, it's not that objective as it could seem, and how important it is to be inclusive when we think about the project and project our ideas, to think about people or other species that are maybe not comfortable with the sounds that could be around, or maybe are unable to perceive them at all. And unlearning point from your presentation really remained pretty much strong in as an impression to me, and I had some answers ready for this session, but I think I already unlearned it.
Let's pick up on some of those points then. Chiara, I mean, I think when I closed my eyes, it was surprising to me. I felt a mixture of kind of calm, but also excitement and intrigue that I didn't feel when I opened my eyes, and I played with that a little bit. But when the people in the room are designing the built environment, how can we take some of the items you've talked about to create these turn these chaotic urban landscapes or soundscapes into something that's much more restorative and enjoyable? Can you give us some tips?
So first of all, I think that any place has a story to tell, and the most important thing is to be aware of our impact, first as a human being, and then also with material, with the shape of the architecture. I'm an audio engineer, but then I translate my way to create a message into the art of music, into the sound art. So in my point of view, for example, for the Sound of Venice, it's like a mixture between art, provocation, and also the emotional part of the sound. I guess, you know, the vibration of sound is the first message that our body receives. So really from our breath, from the footstep on the concrete, the car horns, everything can produce a wonderful sound or a bad sound. So I guess that everything needs to start from the beginning in order to start to learning again how to be polite in our life. And this, it comes naturally into something that can, of course, bring to the design aspect. Also the architecture part of all of this.
Thank you. We've got so much to learn, I think, on that topic. And, you know, the story of, or the sound of my life this morning started at 5:30 with my 5-year-old as well, Paul. I'm sure you feel the same. When we think about, you know, you talked about unlearning, and, you know, we're a large engineering company, and I think if we could reflect on engineers, honestly, engineers love getting things overly complicated. The complexity is something that they kind of enjoy on a very kind of niche topic, but actually we're talking about complexity on a kind of breadth. How do we kind of teach engineers, or how do we adopt a mindset where actually we think big in terms of complexity across multidisciplinary concepts, but also keep that kind of not too deep complexity on actually what we're studying?
I think that's a difficult question, but I think we need to embrace these new frameworks and things like that, which sort of help to give us a bit of a flavour of the impact that's happening. But I think what we need to do is to imbue a much greater sense of value in the materials that we specify, and recognition that, you know, when you just draw a line or sketch a line, that has an implication somewhere else in the world, right? You know, you've drawn your beam. That beam means that somewhere there's a hole being dug to dig it out of the ground, and that might have an impact. So I think we need to really get that feeling. And it's like, you know, when you sit in your car and you haven't put your seatbelt on, you know you haven't put your seatbelt on. You instantly recognize that. That's the kind of feeling we need when we're designing. We have to sort of find a way to connect ourselves to those impacts, I think. And I don't think this is not formal learning. This is a way of thinking. And I don't quite know the way to do that, to be honest, but I think that's how we need to try and get to. And I'm sure there's some degree of education there to improve that, but I think it's a mindset that needs to change.
It's a bit like the food we eat. You know, we're not there at the abattoir, are we? Seeing how our meat gets to our plates. So we need that connection to the materials. It's a really good point. So why aren't we? Why is the industry not doing it? What are the barriers? And, you know, I'm struck by when COVID happened in 2020, humanity kind of managed to rise to an existential threat that was happening in an instant. But yet when we have this kind of slow burn that we're talking about and we talked about earlier, it's not engaging the same reaction. Stanislava, what do you think? Is there a way that urban systems and, you know, architectural design can really address this in a much more urgent way? How do we engage the community in a more urgent manner?
There are many ways, and always, in my opinion, they are specific to the place where we are intervening. So there is no recipe that would cover many different questions that could raise in different places, but a context-related analysis and then decisions that are leading to a design and then interventions. This is how I see possible to also urgently address all the pressures that we have, and also to deal with the complex issues that are complex, and we have to get comfortable with this complexity and deal with it, also thinking, and there Chiara reminded us very well that maybe not intervening in some cases, it's the best intervention or decision that we can make.
And, you know, Anna, you kind of talked briefly about finance, and I don't want to get too far into financing, but, you know, the clients or the people who are building or creating the built environment, they don't necessarily want to always go beyond the regulatory framework, not because they kind of don't want to, just because that's not the game we're in, that's not the way the world works. Is there what kind of regulatory or governmental challenges are there in how we can adopt regenerative design and how we design the built environment?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned the financing because and governance because from the engineering perspective, and I mean, I came back to the point, we know what works and we know what's good. We have a lot of solutions. So I work on water management. We have examples of the cities that are fully circular from the water perspective. Singapore is functioning like that. Singapore is functioning like that because it had to, because it was reliant on the import of water resources, and they wanted to be dependent. They wanted to not be, to increase their resilience to any kind of political decision which may cut off their water resources. And I think comes to your point about COVID. So when there is a need, then things happen. Of course, we are still, although people are talking about it, I think on a societal level, we're probably not there in that sense of urgency. How much we have to scare people to get reactive. I'm always very cautious about that because I think scaring people is not a good way forward. Incentivizing in different ways, definitely, but sustainability and regenerative design is expensive. So I think that's the reality, and what we hear from lots of external organizations that we work with is exactly what you say. There is a minimum compliance, and everything else beyond that is just really expensive, and no one wants to pay. Developers want to make profit, citizens, they don't want to pay too much, and there's like a big societal, socioeconomic context of I think what we are discussing. I personally think the government should take much bigger role in strengthening the regulation, but also then providing resources to implementing the regulation. Because something which is regulated on paper doesn't mean that something will be regulated in reality. And we have examples of, for example, issue with the combined sewer overflows that is very topical from the kind of water perspective. But I think any kind of regulation and change in the way how the sustainability is enabled really needs to go together with, Paul mentioned boundaries and we mentioned complexity, and that's the reality. The world we live in is so complex, but equally complexity and the way about dealing with the complexity has a lot of theory and lots of years of people studying that. How we all get to be very comfortable in thinking about the complexity and how we introduce complexity to everyday citizens so that they understand that every decision they make has a consequences. If I reduce my water use, nothing will change. If we all reduce our water use, a little bit will change. If the whole land reduces water use, a lot of things will change. So there is kind of large-scale behavioral change, I think, solution there, which I think the design can possibly kind of be one of the tools to do that. We talked about technology as well, isn't it? We have now lots of digital platforms and we use them. I guess Pearl is one of those that you can visualize things so much. You can let the models do lots of what-if scenarios and then, experiencing different realities and then trying to find a way to maybe on one side change and kind of look at the behavior, but on the other hand, understanding what good looks like. And I think the combination of those two, it's a big set of changes, isn't it? But the combination of those two with a bit more focus and responsibility from the governments that can find money, money is there, I think would bring us one step forward.
There's this kind of theme emerging about connection, isn't there, to the resources? And it strikes me when you stand in the middle of Copenhagen, you can see the waste-to-energy plant, you can see the wind turbines, and it's our waste and it's it's our energy, but the design has made the waste-to-energy plant a really fun thing to go and ski on. So it's a good example of how I think design can bring that connection. Let's talk about interdisciplinary collaboration, because regenerative design needs this really big holistic thinking. And you know, Paul, you represent 4,000 engineers of all sorts of different technical expertises, whereas Chiara, you're kind of a smaller studio with a more niche kind of expertise. You need to have the generalists and the experts. How do we? Maybe that's a question for the two of you. How do you bridge that gap between the expertise of knowing or having the base technical knowledge? Maybe it's the hard skills, as we talked about earlier, as well as that generalist ability to bring things together. Maybe Chiara, do you want to start on that one?
So I think that, starting to learning something new and try to find a way to have that kind of expertise, it's not that a huge problem. I mean, in my, you said small studio, but we are like 10 people that works on brand specifically, try to know how this brand can impact on the emotion of the audience. So we make a lot of research regarding the cerebral, waves and that kind of really regarding the psychoacoustic. I don't know if I catch the point, but because I'm Italian, but don't laugh. But from my point of view, the most important things that we have to learn, it's like regarding the memory of the place, of the people. You told before regarding COVID when it happened. In that moment, people start to say, "Oh, there is a silence in our city," and we start to regenerate ourselves starting from the priority of our life. So I think this is the best practice that we can approach. Start to practice again, starting from the beginning, and then learning every day something regarding sounds, regarding all that we can generate emotion. Paul, you probably got the right answer. Please answer also for me.
No, I think it's amazing. It's a good example actually of a completely different discipline that I'm pretty sure none of us would have experienced before. I mean, we've spoken before in Ramble in the UK about trying to create T-shaped engineers, which when you think about it is a very linear shape, isn't it? Classic engineering thing to say. But the idea of being broad at the top and then have this deep down. But now thinking about it a bit more, I think actually the notion even of having a shape is probably wrong. We need to be having a much more open notion of what our learning is. And I was just reflecting then that when I went to university, we had like a humanity option every once a week or something. And maybe we should be having that in work. Maybe 10%, 20% of our time should be in a different part of the business or something else, you come in and try things out and rotate. And maybe that's the way we try to break down those barriers. But I think it goes back to the first session on our entire educational structure as well.
I mean, I think sound would be great, the first one. Maybe we'll get Chiara in to teach some of our engineers. Stanislava, your world bridges kind of academia and also professional practice. So how do you see that kind of holistic thinking when it comes to regenerative design being brought together across those two worlds?
Yeah, well, there are many definitions of regenerative design and what it means. But if we could just select a couple of main points, is seeing what we are doing in dialogue with, what we are doing, built environment, in dialogue with the natural environment without creating this binary friction that Professoressa Andreotti was talking this morning, and seeing natural elements of environment as equal stakeholders in the, if we want to use that terminology, in the design process, equal as it could be developer, as it could be user, or any other community part of the process. So seeing it in a multi-dimensional way from different aspects, from aspects of stakeholders, but also on aspect what effect could have any intervention we are designing on the ground that we are working on the neighborhood, on the wider scale, or on a global even scale. So moving on different scales constantly, and this is where my being bridging between academia or research and designer, it's where research helps me a lot. It is where research can truly support design process. Not only can, but should do, because otherwise we cannot adapt on constantly changing conditions and on this ticking of a clock that this morning was quite clearly described to us. So if we truly want not only to damage less, which is not a solution, at least not to our audience and myself, but really try to create the conditions for a regeneration, and regeneration, social, cultural, traditional, environmental, many types of regeneration in a dialogue with the natural system. So creating kind of a co-evolutionary process. This would be the way to go, but very specific, as I said, to a place, thinking about elements, as Chiara just said, memory. Of course, it has an incredible importance, and we think about our life through memory, and memory could be perceived by the walls that we are hearing and feeling, by the people's energy, but of course also about, through the smells, through the music, sound, and all sensors. So it is where exactly I see that science and research could truly support design process, but not one way. They are supporting design process, and then design process supports science. It is a true, I like to call it, dialogue between two and all other elements in the process.
But I think the design is all about connecting kind of technical theories to real-world problems, isn't it? And stakeholder involvement is, of course, vital. But the thing I always struggle with is, if nature is a equal stakeholder now in our projects, who is the voice around the design team meeting that is that voice? And
there are
maybe
no design meetings.
Yeah, maybe we need the 5-year-olds there to represent nature, maybe. A quick final question before we go to the audience with Anna, but you're an advocate for systems thinking in solving this kind of big complexity around how we deal with design to regenerate the environment. And in academia, multidisciplinary collaboration seems quite effective, or so it seems from the outside.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not in practice. But what learnings can we take from your world around converging or convergence of these different skills and expertise?
Well, I mean, I first want to say, I mean, any kind of interdisciplinary work is really difficult. Interdisciplinary research is even more difficult because you have people coming, and I think this is the legacy of the educational system, and we are coming from our area of expertise, which I think is a good thing. And I think, I mean, I work at the university, and we talk a lot about the kind of type of education and what do we do. I think there is a huge value of the core expertise, and I think knowledge that brings with a rigor in learning the basic principles, especially in the physical systems where there are basic principles and the equations that you need to understand and implement. What comes next is, for me, then the huge question. And I think it comes to what, we are, is it T-shape, is it this shape or that shape? But I think for me, it's much more, I think if you want to develop interdisciplinary skills, you can. You can put yourself in the interdisciplinary environment and try to swim. You can also, kind of learn and go through the theory of interdisciplinary work. But I think fundamentally, what creates, I think, interdisciplinarity and true collaboration is putting people in the room who are very open-minded and who have the capacity or force themselves to think outside of their core discipline. So for me, I'm a civil engineer, I did water engineering, I did my PhD in hydrology. The first time I chose an architect for my PhD student wasn't a comfortable decision. He may be here in the audience, Pepe, if you are, sorry. But it was, I knew that's what I wanted because the problem that we wanted to look at was an interdisciplinary problem. But I was comfortable not knowing theory around the urban form design. He was comfortable in trusting that we can teach him a bit of engineering, computational methods, and so on. And I think we created something that was really beautiful, but both of us had to learn and relearn and find a way to communicate with each other and find almost like a common language between the disciplines. And I'm more and more comfortable in that area, but it's a process. And I think if that process doesn't, I think we are trying to create those processes in the university. So Imperial now has what we call schools of convergence science, which we still don't know what exactly that is, but at least the idea behind that is to create a space and resources for that kind of thinking. I think for the big companies like Rumble, that is where you have people that you can bring together. I think there is a process of learning together how to do things in a kind of truly interdisciplinary way, which means that I learn from you, but you also learn from me, and together we create something which is more than the sum of our individual efforts.
Thank you. So, questions from the audience? In particular, if you disagree with anything we said. Is there a mic? Oh, you've got it already. Go for it.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for the great debate, great talks. Really interesting and great to hear that behavior change and like long-term success is being considered. It's fantastic. So I work in Southeast Asia a lot with a lot of developing nations, which, in Europe, we're very rich, relatively in the world. We have this time to think about these bigger problems. We have different issues. How do you think you apply some of these approaches that you talked about in developing nations? And how do we help them kind of start off on the right foot with their cities and the like?
Is it to anyone in particular, or?
And it's an open question.
Anna's got her hand up. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I can just start because I think it's an excellent question. So it's one of the core questions around, especially if we look at the kind of global sustainability, because there are lots of carbon emissions. We want to, it's coming from what we call global north, isn't it, predominantly? Now we want everyone to reduce their emissions, and the question of fairness, is raised, and they say we want to be where you are now. And I think it's a fair question, something that has to be discussed very openly. I think I work a lot in India, and I spend a lot of time in India. So there is, I think Stanislav was talking about the place and the context. The way I think we have to approach problems is that sustainability and regeneration is more than, it's a common goal, and has to be a common goal. It has to be something that everyone would strive to or towards. How we then implement that in countries that have been, not that developed as some others, is I would suggest, and that's what we do, is, they can skip all and avoid maybe the mistakes that we did. So they can, and I think they have the knowledge, great knowledge, to do that in their local context, but maybe communicating what we would do differently now, which, we didn't do 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago, and moving from that point, skipping almost a part in the development and the innovation. I think they have a great chance to do things better than we did. But I think but I think what is also really important is not to impose, because there is a very specific context, socio-economical, environmental context for any place in the world.
there was a question up there, so maybe we'll get the microphone up there. And does anybody want to come in on that while we're waiting for the mic?
I'll come in a second. I mean, I think I totally agree with you, Anna. I would sort of echo that. We're a global organisation, so we need to be drawing on that and using our global presence. But we need to have that humility to recognise that whatever we've done here may not be applicable here. But let's bring that knowledge in an open way, and being cognizant of the cultural differences as well. So I don't think it's a simple solution. I think it's a bit of a conversation, and there's probably an iteration there as well. But certainly we need to make sure we're sharing that knowledge as widely as we can.
Okay. I'm being told last question, so go for it.
Yeah, so I'm an energy engineering student from Technical University of Berlin and co-founder of AI agent software development firm. And I had a question regarding, well, in your speech, Paul, you mentioned more about the materials and the processes that you use in the construction development to make it more sustainable. But what about the materials that you don't use, and which basically become the waste due to degradation or overstocking? So how do you face that issue, and maybe what specific tools are you using in order to make it, the whole supply chain management system more sustainable?
So I think in terms of the other materials, do you mean the end-of-life materials? Is that what you mean? Or?
Yeah.
So I think we're sort of relatively early as an industry in this in some respects. There's lots of things that have come out, lots of initiatives and things about the circular economy to grab hold of those resources at the end of their life. There's a whole range of tools that we're looking at and using, some of our own, some proprietary as well. And I think, to your background, AI obviously has a role to play, but we've also heard this morning about the dangers of a little bit of inbuilt prejudice in AI that we need to be aware of. So I can't give you specific tools that we're using now, but it's a whole range. It depends on the location, the region, what the regulations are as well. But certainly, if I'm honest, I think we're just on the cusp of it. I think there needs to be a bit more of a divergence in frameworks, methodologies and tools before we can start to converge on those which actually are delivering on what we need. But I think we've got a way to go.
Okay, thank you very much.